ever been confused on how to prioritize your different financial goals, this video is for you. There's a lot of personal finance jargon on the internet, but here at Break Your Budget, we cut through the crap and focus on getting the basics right. Today, I'm going to be taking you through what I call my personal finance order of operations. This is essentially a guideline to help you figure out how to prioritize your different financial goals. But the challenge with personal finance is that it's so personal and there's a lot of nuance depending on your specific situation. So unfortunately, there isn't one singular prescriptive path that everyone's going to follow. My goal with this list is to help you navigate all of the big stuff and ultimately feel more empowered about your personal finance journey in the timeline of saving for all of the different big and various financial goals that you might be hearing about. So with that, let's get into it. So I have this list on my phone and I will obviously make sure that it's up on the screen. But basically, I am going to go through this and we're going to start off with the first, which are three kind of non-negotiables or the three key things that you really need to focus on right at the upfront of your personal finance journey before you move on to these other goals and priorities. So the very, very, very first and highest financial priority that you need to focus on is saving up your emergency fund. And your emergency fund is basically your financial fire extinguisher. It is honestly the one thing that is going to save you financially should you run into any sort of problem, whether that be you lose your job and you're unemployed, or you get into a car accident, or you have some type of medical emergency or a medical emergency with your pet. Really anything that requires like a big upfront chunk of money, your emergency fund is designed to help bridge that gap while you figure things out so that you don't have to put that expense on a credit card and incur credit card debt. So think of your emergency fund as, again, that financial fire extinguisher. And a good goal for your emergency fund is about 3 months of your entire expenses. So both your essentials and your non-essentials. I personally have 6 months in my emergency fund because I'm self-employed and I've had a lot of time to really build up those savings. But if you're just getting started on your personal finance journey, obviously 6 months of expenses can feel incredibly overwhelming. Even 3 months can feel incredibly overwhelming. So focus on 1 month first. And once you've hit that 1 month, you can really start thinking about how you want to balance building up your emergency fund with some of these other goals that we'll get to later on. But a 1 month emergency fund is at a minimum what you need to have before you move on to anything else. Number 2 of these non-negotiable things you need to do right at the upfront is pay off any credit card debt. But this is not something that you should do before you save your emergency fund. And the reason why is because if you have credit card debt and no emergency fund, and then you experience an emergency, all that's going to do is force you to put that emergency fund on your credit card and continue digging a deeper hole that is going to be significantly harder to get out of. So even if you have some credit card debt, it's better to let that debt sit for a couple of months so that you can pad up your emergency fund and then completely pivot all of your focus onto paying down that credit card debt. Paying off credit card debt is number 2 after that emergency fund. And honestly, this is my opinion. I do think maybe some other personal finance experts or creators may disagree, but this is what I would do. If I had credit card debt and I had my 1 month emergency fund, I would focus my entire efforts on eliminating that credit card debt before I move on to some of these bigger goals. And that's because credit card debt is one of those things that can be very, very challenging to get out of. But when you focus all of your attention on it, you switch to cash, you can pay it off on a much faster timeline without incurring unnecessary interest because those interest rates on credit cards are so high. Number three, and this is something to do regardless of if you have an emergency fund and regardless of if you have credit card debt, is to contribute up to your employer match for your 401k if your employer offers a match. And the reason why you want to make sure you're doing this simultaneously with your emergency fund and paying off credit card debt if you have it is because your employer match for your 401k is free money. And so you should be taking advantage of getting that money if it's offered to you. So what does this mean? For example, let's say you work at a job and your employer offers you a 401k and they offer you an up to 3% match. That means that if you are contributing 3% of your salary to your 401k, your employer will also match up to that 3%. If you're contributing 2%, they'll match you 2%. So you want to make sure that you are contributing that 3% to get that full 3% match. Because again, this is free money and it's money you're leaving on the table if you don't make those contributions. If you have credit card debt, then I would only be contributing that 3% so that you can get the 3% match while you pay down that credit card debt. And once you eliminate that credit card debt, then you can focus on increasing your 401k contributions. And just to be clear, that 3% is just an arbitrary example. It could be anything depending on where you work and if your employer even offers a match. So those are the three must-do things at the beginning of your financial journey. And really you want to make sure that you've accomplished these goals. So saving up your emergency fund, making sure that you have eliminated credit card debt, and making sure that you're contributing the minimum up to your employer match to get the full match before you move on to these other goals. The challenge when we get to these other goals, which we're going to move into now, is that things will shift based off of your situation. And the factors to consider here are both the priority and timing of the goal, as well as what has the highest ROI or return on investment from both a financial and an emotional perspective, based off of what's most important to you. So I'm going to go through these and I'll share some nuance to each of them and what I personally think or what I personally would prioritize. But again, all of these are going to be sort of in an arbitrary, not necessarily in order of most importance, because what you focus on depends on what is going on in your life. And that is where the nuance of personal finance comes into play. I had a conversation with a financial advisor a couple of years ago, and a really interesting insight that she shared with me was it's totally fine to pause goals, to refocus or to pivot towards something else that is a higher priority or has a tighter timeline based off of the context of your life. So the example that she gave me was it's okay, for example, to reduce your retirement contributions if you're saving up for a down payment on a home in order to buy that home in the next year or two. So also keep that thought process in mind as we go through this. So the first goal to consider would be paying off student loans or any low interest debt. And this is something that you can balance with bulking up your emergency fund. So let's say that you saved that 1 month emergency fund and you don't have any credit card debt and you're paying or you're contributing the minimum amount to your retirement accounts. And you also have a student loan. So maybe you are now making payments towards your student loan while also bulking up your emergency fund to get to that 3-month threshold. This lower interest debt is something that can be balanced with working towards some of these other financial goals. And I would highly recommend if you have lower interest debt, so this would be anything where the interest rate is not 7 to 9% or lower. Honestly, if you have something that's 9%, I would focus on trying to eliminate that as well. But 7% is kind of the threshold here. I would recommend that you use a debt amortization calculator to forecast out some different scenarios of what it would look like to pay off your debt based off of how much money you're putting towards certain things. Because with that information, you can decide if paying the minimum on that loan or on that debt makes sense while you balance it with some other goals, or if paying the minimum isn't really going to make a dent in that debt and it makes more sense to put additional money towards the principal and pay beyond the minimum. This is again an example of where nuance comes into the picture. And I would recommend if you use the personal finance dashboard, the debt payoff calculators are actually designed to be a debt amortization calculator. So you can sort of plug and play your different numbers and forecast out when you would clear that debt based off of your different payments. So this is an exercise that I highly, highly recommend you go through if you have any debt and you're really thinking about how you want to balance it with other goals. The next goal that you could consider would be working towards various short-term savings goals. And I'm going to preface this by saying short-term savings goals are going to look different for everyone. But if you have short-term savings goals, those need to be saved in a high-yield savings account. Another account to consider for these short-term savings goals, so these are like cash savings goals, it's money that you're planning to spend or use in the next 1 to 3 to 5-ish years. Again, that timeline is a little bit fuzzy and it totally depends on you and your life. But another account you could consider would be a CD, which is a certificate of deposit. The thing to keep in mind with a CD is that the money that you put into that CD is completely tied up for the period of time in like the CD that you agreed to. So for example, I have some money that I have set aside for a future down payment on a home that I'm hoping to make a purchase of in the next like year or two in a CD. And that CD is actually earning me, I believe, 5%. So it's a little bit higher than the interest rates on high yield savings accounts. But I cannot access that money for the 9-month period that that CD is happening for. So the TLDR on this is you don't want to use a CD unless you know with absolute certainty that the money you're putting into it is money that you won't need to access for that defined period of time. Anyways, a couple of short-term savings goals that you could consider or might be on your horizon, especially if you are a young professional, could be bulking up and finishing your emergency fund. It could be saving up for a down payment on a home. It could be saving up for a down payment on a car. It could be saving up to go on vacation, saving up for a wedding, saving up to attend weddings. These are all like those short-term savings goals. It's money that you're going to be spending in this period of your life or in the next couple of years. So you don't want to invest that money because you don't want to run the risk that you need to sell your investments at a loss, especially in that early period of time where your money is invested. So it's best meant for a high yield savings account or situation depending a CD. So again, this is another goal that you would want to consider balancing with paying off low interest debt in those retirement contributions. But the amounts you're putting towards those goals, the way you're prioritizing them, totally depend on what's happening in your life at this period of time. So maybe you're not planning to get married for another, like, I don't know, however many years, or you're not dating anyone. So why would you be saving up for a wedding? So that might not be something that you need to prioritize. And you might be wanting to go on a nice big vacation next year, or maybe you want to purchase a home in the next 2 years. So really getting clear on timelines, how much money you'll need for certain things will also help you prioritize which goals you need to focus on and how to balance them all together. The next goal to consider would be increasing your contributions to your retirement account. So that could be a 401k or an IRA. And this boils back to the original point about making sure that you're at least contributing up to the match on your retirement account. So if you want to expand beyond that, a really great way to figure out like what is a good amount for me to contribute to these accounts and what makes sense for all of my other goals is to use what is called a compound interest calculator. And that's where you can forecast if you were to contribute certain amounts of money towards different investments over X amount of years, assuming X interest rate, which generally the interest rate you should use to forecast your investments is around 7% because that's an inflation adjusted rate. You can forecast out what that amount of money that you're investing over a defined period of time would look like 10, 20, 30 years from now. Obviously, these are just estimates, they're just projections. Who knows if they are actually real? But it can really help you contextualize the amount of money you're contributing to different accounts in the context of what that could look like in the future. And the last goal to consider here on this initial personal finance order of operations would be brokerage investing. So let's say that you have, discretionary income that you want to invest, and maybe you want to have access to that money before you retire. That is where brokerage investing comes into the picture. So again, this totally depends on your other financial goals in the timeline of those financial goals. But I'll use myself as the example. So right now I am debt free, so I don't have any debt payments, which makes financial goals a lot less complicated. And I also have a full 6-month emergency fund. I'm not, necessarily saving up for a down payment at this period of time because I already have money set aside for that future payment should I decide to purchase a home. And instead, I am just contributing money to my retirement account, which I'm hoping to max out. And then any additional money that I earn that I would want to put towards savings, I am investing via a brokerage account. And that's because I don't have any immediate short-term goals that I need to be actively contributing to at this point in time. I'm going on a vacation this year, but I already have the money saved up for that. Like I mentioned, am not necessarily buying a home in the immediate term, so I'm not putting tons of money towards that at this point in time either. I'm focused on maxing out my retirement accounts, and then any discretionary money for savings beyond that, I'm investing just for my future overall to grow my wealth. So that's how I'm prioritizing my goals right now. But let's say tomorrow I decide I want to buy a house by the end of the year. What I would do is I would shift probably the money that I'm putting towards brokerage investing towards padding up my down payment fund, if that makes sense. So things will change based off of, again, personal priorities and the timing of your life. But with all of that in mind, this is like a financial order of operations to consider. I would make sure that you're not brokerage investing and investing beyond retirement until you feel really comfortable with your retirement investing first, because retirement accounts are tax advantaged. So you want to make sure you're taking advantage of those tax benefits before you go to a brokerage account, since brokerage accounts have no tax advantages at all. If you found this video to be interesting or you learned anything from it, I would highly recommend that you consider reading my book. It's called Own Your Money, and it goes into more detail about different goals, how to set goals, how to bring things into your budget, and how to tie everything together. I also would recommend that you check out my tool, the Personal Finance Dashboard, because it has a space inside where you can not only forecast out like your debt payoff and really understand your contributions to your different goals, but you can also plug and play these goals into your broader budget and forecast out those contributions for the year. I really love using the annual spending plan because I can see how different amounts that I'm aiming to put towards my various goals impacts the money that I'm earning and allocating out to different things, if that makes sense. It's basically a great place to like puzzle piece your budget together and make those adjustments and have a really clear line of sight into where your money is going. So that's within the Personal Finance Dashboard. I recommend you check it out. If you enjoyed this video and you found it informative, I would love if you could give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my YouTube channel. And if you're interested in learning more about different financial topics or anything related to personal finance, please, please, please let me know in the comments. I would love to make a video and help you out. And with that, I will catch you in the next one.